Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 13. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. What's on the lineup? Uncomfortable silences. Are we capable of sitting in uncomfortable silence as human beings? A few minutes on the political landscape over the course of the last week. You got Trump in there, you've got George Santos, you've got the CIA and the letter that was sent out claiming the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. A reflection on being content in your discontent. Can we find happiness in our discontent? And finally, the New York Metropolitans, bad at baseball. Not good. If you like what you hear, please give it 5 stars, thumbs up, hit that like button. Please write a review and send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting. Without further ado.
Act 1, Uncomfortable Silence.
I've been doing this podcast for a few years, so you probably already know this about me, dear listener. I don't know when to shut up. In my prior profession, it was such an asset. It was the jewel in my crown, not knowing when to shut up. Generally, that is an affliction of many an attorney, not knowing when to shut up. This isn't the gift of gab. This is not knowing when to make a statement and let it sit. Ask a question and let that sit. Give the uncomfortable silence its space, its room to breathe, and put the pressure on the other person to respond. And that is the topic of this segment, uncomfortable silence. Are we capable of giving it space, of living with it? How often are we in a conversation with people and you have that predictable yet unavoidable lull? Where it could be 3 people, it could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 20. There's always that part of the conversation where you have the segue between what one person is saying, a story that's being told, a conversation that's being had, and its ultimate conclusion, its finish. And then you have that silence. As a species, we are not comfortable in silence around other members of our species. We feel compelled to fill that void. I believe Mia Wallace summed it up best in the movie Pulp Fiction.
Don't you hate that?
Hate what?
Uncomfortable silences. Why do we feel it's necessary to yak about bullshit in order to be comfortable?
I don't know. That's a good question.
That's when you know you found somebody really special. You can just shut the fuck up for a minute, comfortably share silence.
Now, in my former profession, it was an asset not to shut the fuck up and comfortably share silence. Generally, being in a room with 3 or more attorneys, you're going to have a room full of talk. You're going to have a room full of noise. And generally, it's what you could refer to as static or white noise. Not much of it was worth consuming anyway. Empty calories. In my current profession, which is really just sales, most professions are just sales. The law is unique. You are kind of selling. You're selling to clients. You're selling to opposing counsel. You're selling to judges. You're not really selling, though, in the same capacity that you are in most other professions, which is getting someone to come to an agreement. In the law, I think you could probably more refer to it as a negotiation, and you're trying to sell within what you would call negotiation style. In that negotiation style, very often people are walking away after an agreement is reached feeling dissatisfied. In most other professions, you are selling to a need. You're creating a gap and you're selling to a need. Yet, it's very difficult to just sit there after you have created the environment where someone has to actually explore their needs. They have to explore potential gaps that currently exist in their life in order to determine whether or not there is a need great enough, whether what you have to offer will satisfy that need, and whether or not there's enough value so that they'll separate themselves from the money in order to get what you have to satisfy their need. I've heard this numerous times: telling is not selling. And you hear this so frequently that you figure anyone who's in sales or anyone that has any type of job that's tangential to sales, well, they understand. You just ask questions, you develop, you find, you cater to the need, and you can close the sale. Yet, we have a very difficult time, I have a very difficult time, sitting in the uncomfortable silence. I feel the reason why so many people, whether you're in sales or not, I feel the reason why so many people are telling instead of selling is because they can't sit in uncomfortable silence. It is not easy to ask questions of other people, particularly when you feel that they are difficult questions, that those questions are going to challenge the other person, that by way of the other person's tone, you feel that they are becoming agitated or that they believe that they are difficult questions. It's hard to reach that space and just sit in it. Yet, this is precisely the space that we need to be in, that needs to be filled in order for us to change, to grow, to reach our higher potential. If we're not willing to swim around in that uncomfortable space, we're going to become complacent. We're going to become static. I am having a difficult time swimming in that space. I'm getting better in it. Better said, I guess, I'm getting better at it. I'm not in the deep end of the pool. If I'm swimming in that space, I'm still swimming around in the kiddie part of the pool. It's not yet time for Adult Swim. Did I want to create a segment admitting as much? No, I did not. Why am I doing it then? What's the point of this segment? This uncomfortable silence is valuable. This uncomfortable silence can be valuable in a interpersonal relationship between two friends, between a group of friends. It can be valuable in a romantic relationship, particularly where there are things that are being left unsaid that are starting to fester, that are starting to create separation between two people in a romantic relationship. People that claim to be in love with one another, claim to be committed to one another for the rest of their lives. Most importantly, though, and this is why I'm doing this segment, it is certainly present, this uncomfortable silence, when we are making the right decision about money, how to invest money, what we should do with money. We have a terrible, terrible relationship with money, and although your relationship with money may not be as bad as mine, I am saying this because I have had a bad relationship with money. I am making up with money as we speak. When we get to that point about our financial situation, about how we're going to invest, what we're going to do for the future, we want to talk all the way through it. We want to tell and not sell. We really don't want to address the stark reality of the situation that we face. And we certainly don't want to get that input from a third party. If you were talking to a financial advisor and there are difficult questions being asked and there is that uncomfortable silence and all you want to do is either scream or escape, you're going in the right direction. I'm here to tell you, dear listener, that is a positive thing. Someone willing to sit in that uncomfortable silence with you and ask you the type of questions that you're going to have to answer one day. It may not be tomorrow. It may not be in a week. But it's the type of question that you don't want to have to answer 25 years from now. It's the type of question that you don't want to have to address when you are incapable, is probably the best word for it, incapable of doing anything about it. In my current position, I'm working with more clients that are seniors than I ever have in my entire life. And a lot of these seniors have lived full lives, They never had someone sit in that uncomfortable silence with them and address their finances. What are they going to do? What happens if you actually live past, let's say, 85 years old? What happens if after you've saved all the money that you've saved, you run out of money in 10 years, in 12 years? We all want a guarantee in life. We want to hear the word guarantee. Yet when it comes to our finances, we rarely ever hear the word guarantee, and we're completely comfortable with it. Where in my former life, in my former profession, I felt myself compelled often to run my mouth, to talk over objections, to talk through uncomfortable situations, I am now learning that it is way more valuable to sit in an uncomfortable silence with someone, whether it be an interpersonal relationship, whether it be a romantic relationship, but certainly in a business relationship, certainly a business relationship involving money and finances, to sit in that uncomfortable silence with questions that need to be asked, but moreover, need to be answered. This is my call to arms, dear listener. Don't be afraid to sit in that uncomfortable silence. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions and then shut your mouth. What you'll find in the aftermath, having gone through that with someone else, it's exactly as Mia Wallace said. You found something special when you can just shut the fuck up, ponder, reflect, share that uncomfortable silence, and come out the other side.
Act 2 is this how it's always been. Have we pulled back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz and found an old man pulling levers?
Donald Trump gets sued by a woman for sexual assault and defamation, loses the case, jury awards $5 million. I don't know that there's ever been a presidential candidate that's had a judgment against him for $5 million for sexual assault. Story breaks that George Santos is indicted and then turns himself in the next day. Story breaks that members of the CIA, if not in an organized fashion, it looks like it's an organized endeavor, members of the CIA were coordinating, putting together this so-called letter that charged the Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian propaganda in an effort to influence the outcome of the 2020 election, to de-emphasize the influence peddling of one Joe Biden, particularly in Ukraine, if not also in East Asia, particularly China. I ask you, dear listener, are things falling apart, or is this just how it's always been? Are we just now seeing the curtain being pulled back on that Wizard of Oz? In season 1 of this very podcast, I likely could have done 3 different segments on each one of these stories. I could have gotten in my ego and gotten all excited and talked about corruption, and what's the point? It's not so much that we shouldn't care that there is this corruption. I think we should take a broader perspective on it, perhaps get out of all the emotion. Now, not to say that emotion isn't valuable and can't guide us in many different ways, but let's use some of our rationale, some of our thinking processes. How different is this than any other era in American politics or politics in general? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any one of these stories. The only point of this segment is just to reinforce we keep voting for these people. We keep believing the narrative that they're putting out in the moment that they're putting it out. I don't believe that this country is falling apart. I don't believe that we have to make radical changes in the political system or how it operates in order to effectuate great change. It's all within us. Are we going to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden in 2024? There's a slew now of candidates from both political parties that are now coming out. Are we going to embrace any one of them? Are any one of them, whether it's on the right or the left, whether or not they're a Republican or a Democrat, are any one of them worse than the candidates that we've had in the past 8 years, the candidates that have ended up winning these elections? If we end up with Trump and Biden, we end up with Trump and Biden. Who else is there voting for them in these primaries? Who else is there supporting them on these campaign trails? It's us. So to the extent that we feel like we're trapped right now, haven't we always been trapped? Haven't every one of the voters that have ever voted since this country was founded been quote unquote trapped? What's changed? Our politicians are a reflection of us. If anything's changed, it's us. It's not them. I don't know that voting for any different candidate in a congressional election, a senatorial election, even a presidential election is going to wipe this slate clean, is going to drain the swamp. We have to start somewhere, though. We have to start with something. And if not now, then when? For my part, I give a pass to every single person that existed, that lived in the United States up until probably 10, 15 years ago. They didn't have access to all the information that we do. They didn't have access to that information in an instantaneous, in a split-second raw medium that allowed them to understand better what's going on in their world, to understand better the personalities that made up the political landscape that they had created. We have more information. We know more about what's going on. Do we find ourselves in any better position? Does having this information, does being informed help us make more informed decisions? Clearly not. Let's take responsibility for it, dear listener. Nothing's changed. We just know more about what's going on than we ever have. The difference between us, this generation of people, and let's say people 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, they didn't have the weight of responsibility. Ignorance is bliss. They didn't know, so they could be forgiven for making the same bad choices, the quote-unquote mistakes, over and over again. What excuse do we have?
Act 3. Can we find contentment in discontent?
Can we be content in discontent? Can we be comfortable with being unhappy? I am going through a massive career change, and it hasn't been easy. In fact, it's been quite difficult dealing with the emotions, dealing with all of the expectations, those types of thoughts, feelings that come up about where you should be at any point in your life, why you aren't there, choices that you've made, whether or not you're going in the right direction. As unique as those feelings may be for any individual, it is very likely part of the human condition. This is something that we all experience. Very few people can actually state, I'm exactly where I want to be, when I want to be there, and I'm perfectly happy at this point in my life. Is there merit? Is there possibility? Is there opportunity in being content in discontent? In being happy about being unhappy? When I got back from Costa Rica after having sat with Aya, Mother Aya, oh, how you've changed me. I went in not knowing what was going to happen during an ayahuasca journey, much less 4 ayahuasca journeys in a row, night after night, night after night. I can admit that even though I had no idea what was really going to happen, I did have an expectation that somehow there would be a profound change. Much like people who state they found Jesus and they were alleviated is probably the best word. They were relieved, maybe that's a better word, of many of their vices. Didn't have to drink anymore. Didn't have to go out and whore anymore. Didn't have to smoke cigarettes anymore. I look back on that person and realize the extent to which there's naivete. That change is prolonged, it's violent, and it doesn't lead to this immediate state of bliss. There's all these memes on the internet that I was exposed to, and it just seems like the universe put them in my path after I got back from Costa Rica, after I had sat with ayahuasca. That change is often imagined as some sort of pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, and then the next slide of the meme is what it actually looks like, and it's someone violently crying or throwing up. Not at all what we expect, and again, that's part of the problem, is forming expectations, but not at all what we expect, like in a Bible story where Saul is on the road and he's struck by God and he falls off of his horse or donkey, if you will, and he is then transformed into Paul. No, that's a blessing that is not bestowed on many of us. So then, can we be content in this discontent during this process of change? I was listening to, I believe it was Earl Nightingale, and he made just one comment in probably a lecture that was 45 minutes to the effect that all change for the better, improvements in society, have been born of discontent, of a dissatisfaction with the status quo. No matter what you have or what you're experiencing, Nightingale maintains, you will become bored of it. You will get tired of eating free pizza if you work in a pizza shop. You'll get tired of having steak every night. I can actually attest to this. When I went on the carnivore diet, I was eating steak every single day. I never thought I would get tired of steak, but I started to look for different varieties, different things that I could do with different types of meats because I actually became tired of steak. We long for the things that we don't have, and then when we have them, once we're exposed to them for a significant period of time, we long for something else. Is this a bad thing? Most of us, well, maybe not most of us, I know me. I believe out there in the world, as I've experienced it, that most of us fall victim to what I'm about to state, but I know that I have. And it's that, well, when am I going to find the thing that's going to make me happy? And really, there's nothing out there. Your discontent is motivation. You want to continue to grow and experience. Be content in your discontent and let it push you to experience new things and determine in that experience whether or not you like them. This is much easier said than done because in the moment where we're experiencing the discontent, there's that little voice, that voice of perhaps ego, whether or not that's protecting you by way of fear or anxiety or worry. This is stupid. This isn't going to work. This is going to blow up in your face. This is going to drive you to the poorhouse. That voice in me has had an audience for years, and probably too large an audience. Leaving the law, entering a new industry, at a point in my career when most professionals are just peaking at their earning power, earning as much money as they're likely going to earn in the next 5 to 10 years as they possibly can to position them in retirement. Me, really, for all intents and purposes, starting over, learning to embrace, perhaps kicking and screaming, learning to embrace the state of being content with being discontent. Will I succeed? Will I fail? That's the question we all ask ourselves. And when we're sitting on our deathbed, will it really matter? Will we at least look back and be able to think to ourselves, I did it. I wallowed out into that void, that vacuum of the unknown, and I embraced being content with being discontent, finding happiness in the moment every day, not trying to find happiness at some destination. I hope in this revelation that you, dear listener, also embrace being content with being discontent, to push yourself to do some of the things that you might be thinking about doing and yet not doing because of that little voice in your head. Again, it's expectation. It's defining yourself by material things, by the way that you see other people seeing you. Can we break free of that? I surely cannot say because I have not reached some point, some destination. I can say to you, dear listener, I'm going along for the journey. Faceplant or not, I'm on that path.
Act 4. The New York Metropolitans are not good at baseball.
Mets look bad. I mean, they look bad. Pitching bad. Touted as being good because you had two marquee names at the head of the lineup. Unfortunately, both of them old. Both of them now showing old. Both of them now rarely pitching. The rest of the lineup has not been able to carry the weight. Hitting not good, as they have for stretches over the course of the last 3 seasons. Just shown an inability to string together any hits, don't hit a lot of home runs, don't hit home runs consistently to the extent that they ever do. Came out of the gate playing pretty well, had a decent record. I think they've lost 13 out of 16, maybe it's 14 out of 17, something to that effect. Not good. The payroll that they have and the expectations that they have, I think that there's a legitimate threat that somebody's going to get fired, whether or not it's Showalter himself or members of his staff. How long can a skid like this go on with a team that has the budget, the money that's being spent on them, the expectations that are being placed on them, and such a poor result on the field? The problem with firing anyone, I don't know that it solves any of the problems that the team has. Is that going to make any of the pitching better? Are you going to make old men healthier? Is it going to make the home run ball actually go out of such a huge baseball park? Are the Mets going to start stringing together a bunch of hits? I had an uneasiness at the beginning of the season with that staff, the pitching staff, just being so old. I don't know that Scherzer, I don't know that Verlander have had injury-free seasons over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. It's expected that they're not going to be 100% throughout the course of a 162-game season. It isn't promising when many of those games that they're not participating in are games at the beginning of the season when you'd figure they'd have the best chance of being ready to play baseball. Can the Mets turn it around? Of course they can. They've got a lot of talent. They've got a great manager. It's not like it's a substantially different team than the one that won over 100 baseball games last year and turned around what was a listless, a rudderless ship not one season before. Frankly, I don't know that I have a lot more to say about this. The Mets aren't good right now, and it's early and blah, 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 but how far behind do you want to see a team get in a division that has the reigning World Series, the National League champion, and has the Atlanta Braves, a World Series winner, not, 2-3 seasons ago? I have been able to distract myself with the NHL playoffs, which have been phenomenal, and the NBA playoffs, which have been really good as well. But summer is fast approaching, and we will be left with nothing but baseball. And I will have nothing but the leaky ship that is the New York Metropolitans. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.